Hey kids, History Channel guy here. So today, in honor of 1,000 subscribers, I'm doing the worst leaders in human history. So these are basically all of the worst dictators in human history, and we're going to be going over them. And we have the S tier to the D tier. Before I start, we are only a couple hundred, about 250 viewing hours away from being able to monetize the channel. So if you guys could make sure you watch and rewatch videos just all the way through, that'd be a big help, just so we can keep making sure the channel grows. But yeah, let's get started here. So I'm gonna go with Genghis Khan first, and I'm gonna put Genghis Khan in the D tier. So the reason why I say this is I think that Genghis Khan was actually a good leader. So there's obviously the part where the Mongols were very cruel when they were conquering different territories in the world. However, that cruelty just didn't is not the whole story. So what I mean by that is that the Mongols were able to integrate Europe and Asia, and because of that, the we saw trade between both Europe and Asia, and it was almost like a new Silk Road. When prior to that, European and Asiatic trade was basically halted. Simultaneously, the Mongols were very religiously tolerant, so they didn't force their religion on anyone, meaning that you would have a wide diversity of religions within the Mongol Empire, and they were also very good at, despite not being a very literate people, they were very good at bureaucratic organization, meaning because of how wide and diverse the Mongol Empire was, they were very good at placing bureaucrats where they needed to be. So areas which were underrepresented and previously did not have written records soon had written records. So the fact is that security was built during this time. It was a empire which was very diverse and religiously tolerant, which was never seen at the time. And also, there's a lot of stigma around the Mongols that they had a lot of cruelty. And don't get me wrong, they were very cruel. You can just look at their sieges of the Middle East to find that out. However, they were using tactics which were not common, but not unheard of at the time. The killing everyone if they resisted you was a pretty common siege tactic in early medieval Europe. If you just look at the Crusades, for instance, you could see the cruelty of medieval forces against those who couldn't defend. So yeah, I think Genghis Khan was a good leader. Without Genghis Khan, we would probably not have modern day Russia. We would not have a lot of the modern day Middle East. We wouldn't have seen the rise of many of the empires that we have today, and that's a lot of that's thanks to the Mongol Empire uniting Asia and Europe once again. Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh is a very interesting figure. I'm gonna put him in the C list. I don't think he's as cruel as everyone thought he was. I think he was just a revolutionary, and a lot of you might disagree with that. But the fact is that Ho Chi Minh was able to successfully conquer. Prevent Chinese invasion, French invasion, United States invasion from Vietnam. And the fact is that he was just a socialist. He really didn't have that authoritarian of a regime. If you actually look at the previous South Vietnamese leaders, unfortunately, there was a lot of U.S. backed dictators that led those governments. So yeah, pretty bad of the U.S. to enact all these South Vietnamese dictators when they were supposedly fighting against a dictatorship. But yeah, that's where I put Ho Chi Minh. It's very interesting that everyone really hates him when really he didn't do as much. Let's see. Let's go to an African dictator now. Let's go to Amin. Amin is in the A tier. Amin is also known as the Butcher of Uganda. And the reason why he did that is he would literally kill his political opponents and cannibalize them, meaning that he would basically feed them to his tigers and stuff, and he would also um, have his troops go across. He was the leader of Uganda, and they would rape and pillage everything, and it was just insane the type of stuff he did. He was also a bitter anti-Semite. He's known as the Hitler of Africa to a lot of historians, and yeah, Amin was a terrible, terrible guy, and certainly deserves the A-list here. He killed hundreds of thousands of people when he was ruler of Uganda, and he certainly deserves the name the Butcher of Uganda. Um, King Leopold, this guy sucked. King Leopold, very famously written about in the book called King Leopold's Ghost, which is an excellent book, and I strongly recommend it to whomever is interested in Belgium. But he was the king of Belgium, and during what's known as the Berlin Conference and the Scramble for Africa, he basically got the whole interior of Africa, which is now the modern day Congo. And his tactics for running the Congo were extremely harsh, and he would set quotas for the amount of rubber that was needed for his men to do that. But what would happen is he would chop off the limbs of those who wouldn't get enough rubber, and he would whip and enslave all these people, and it's really a really dark history of European slash African history, and he basically legalized slavery and led to the deaths of and the ensured that there wasn't development in the Congo for centuries. So yeah, King Leopold is definitely up there for one of the worst leaders. Emperor Hirohito. So we're doing a World War II one now. I'm gonna give him a B list here. So I don't blame much of, though he was technically the fascist ruler of Japan. I would say that Emperor Hirohito was not directly responsible for much of the atrocities done by the Japanese. Meaning, I would put it more on the militaristic style of the government. So, after you can kind of see this with once the nuclear bombs were dropped. There are many members of the Japanese government that wanted the war to continue despite the atomic bombs being dropped. And Emperor Hirohito was the one who put his foot down. So in many ways, he was more of the figurehead as the Emperor of Japan, as the real people in charge were the militaristic members of the Japanese party, which basically ran the government for Hirohito. But that's not to say that Hirohito was not compliant with that. He certainly was. But when it comes to worst dictators of all time, he certainly cannot be in the S or A tier. But he was compliant in many of the atrocities which were done by the Japanese in Manchuria and across Southeast Asia. Let's see here. Saddam Hussein. D-list. Saddam Hussein is, in hindsight, Saddam Hussein is probably someone who should have been kept in power. Though he committed atrocities in Iraq and he invaded Kuwait, there is really no reason the United States should have toppled him, because it destabilized the Middle East. These obviously is a modern day political issue, but yeah, I don't think Saddam Hussein was as bad as everyone thought he was, and the evidence is kind of showing now, considering the onslaught of ISIS and other terrorist groups in the region, and we'd be much better served to if we continued allowing him to be in the Middle East. There was no weapons of mass destruction. He didn't have chemical bombs. Like, yeah, Saddam Hussein not as bad as everyone thinks, but he's still a shitty leader, unlike Genghis Khan, who was actually a good leader. Like, Genghis Khan, believe it or not, he promoted democracy amongst his troops. It's like that's unheard of for the time. Mehmed V. He's an A-list. So Mehmed V is a very fascinating story because he was the leader of the Ottoman Empire during the infamous Armenian genocide. And the reason why we don't really talk about him that much is because Turkey is a NATO member, meaning that we are not allowed to acknowledge the Armenian genocide because it was technically done by the Ottoman Empire. So they've done an excellent job of erasing this history. But the Armenian genocide was Mehmed V's brainchild. He came up with almost most of it, and unfortunately, what was used in the Armenian genocide was actually used by Hitler in the Holocaust. So yeah, Mehmed V definitely up there. He's complacent in the second largest genocide and technically the first genocide in human history. So Mehmed V is certainly up there. Let's see, Pol Pot. Pol Pot's in the A tier as well. Pol Pot is one of the lesser known historical figures, but the fact is that Pol Pot killed millions and millions of people in Cambodia. And it is estimated that he killed between 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians, and he had some of the most like drastic, insane stuff. And the Khmer Rouge was his sort of like militaristic wing, and they would go and kill anyone who was like ethnically Vietnamese. They'd kill religious leaders, anyone who was educated, because he really did not want the country to be educated, and as he knew that anyone educated could be someone who toppled his power. That's, you saw that as well with Amin, who also killed all of Uganda's educated elite. But yeah, Pol Pot killed millions and millions of people. If you had basically above a high school education, you were on the death list. And what happened is that Cambodia had a complete brain drain because of Pol Pot's actions, and it's still facing the repercussions of that today. Paul Mugabe of Zimbabwe, he is not as bad as everyone thinks he is. Obviously not a great... Oh, Robert Mugabe, I beg your pardon. I don't know why I said Paul Mugabe. Yeah, he was a Zimbabwean revolutionary, and he's really not as bad as everyone says he is. He ensured that Zimbabwe flipped its country from white rule to black rule. It used to be Rhodesia. It used to be, I believe, a British or a French colony. I forget which one. I think French. But yeah, Zimbabwe was not the best place for Africans prior to Mugabe's rule, and he kind of shaped it up a bit. But that's not to say that Mugabe was not the best leader of all time, but certainly cannot be at the A or B list tier of this list. Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler, I'm going to give a D because it's kind of like Genghis Khan, where you have people who just don't like him writing, if that makes sense. So the thing about Vlad the Impaler is that he was someone who liberated his country, and the fact is that because he liberated the country, he was seen as just a cruel figure. Like, obviously putting people through spikes it sucks, but he only got written about because he lost the war, and as a result they wanted to victimize and demonize everything he did. So I don't think he's as bad as everyone thinks he was, but certainly wasn't a great leader. But he also liberated his country. I think it was called Wallachia or something. Wallachia. Someone please forgive me in the comment section below. But yeah, he's also what Dracula is based on, so you kind of see his little Dracula thing. But yep, wasn't that bad. Ivan the Terrible was not that terrible, and I will go to the grave about this. Ivan the Terrible was actually a good leader. If you really think about it, I'm going to move him to the second best here. Ivan the Terrible, if he died at the age of 40, he would have been known as one of the greatest czars in Russian history. He transformed Russia from being a medieval society to an empire, and he basically set the modern day czardom into effect. And he became very paranoid after a certain age, and that's when he started to do some of the crazy stuff. But he was not a bad leader. But you might disagree, but I think Ivan the Terrible was actually a net benefit, kind of like Genghis Khan to Russia. They're both net benefits. I took a class on Imperial Russia this previous year, and my professor kind of convinced me about both of them. It's just like, yeah, they actually did a pretty net positive. It's just historical accounts were written about them afterwards, which negatively portrayed them. Fidel Castro, C-list. The thing about Fidel Castro is there's always the joke that Cuba has a 100% literacy rate, but I think Fidel Castro cannot be more than a C-list just because of how small of a country Cuba was. And let's face it, Cuba has basically been colonized its whole existence, and that sucks. But at the same time, Fidel Castro was a dictator. Let's just call him what he is. But yeah, he set Cuba back decades, but at the same time, he was such a small scale dictator, such a tiny country, and he couldn't have done as much as we'd think. So we're gonna have our first S tier. Yeah, I think Joseph Stalin is one of the worst leaders in human history. So the reason why I say Joseph Stalin is the worst, one of the worst leaders in human history, is because um, he literally, his policies led to the death of like 25 million Russians. He had infamously had so many purges of different individuals. If anyone who would meet any threat, he was basically killed. Some of them, there's not even a reason for him to kill. They just killed him because he needed to have a certain quota each time. It was insane, this type of stuff he did. And simultaneously, his terrible economic practices led to some major famines, which killed millions and millions of people. His wartime tactics, though he was one of the allies in World War II, his wartime tactics were disgusting. He would just throw soldiers at him. And he had a policy where if you retreated, you would actually get shot. You were not allowed to give up any ground. So it was just a forward march, and you just sling millions and millions of lives. And many of them weren't even Russian. They were part of other Soviet territories like Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Mongolia, all those countries. And yeah, he just killed so many people, and he was a very deep racist. He hated the Jews. He hated people of Asiatic descent, believing that they were not true Russians. He wanted, if they weren't European style Russians or Soviets, he would not have enjoyed them. And the way he took power was also really shady. He was the general secretary of the Communist Party, and he gave jobs to all of his friends. It's just, he sucks, and people need to call him out on this. We had a whole Cold War because of Stalin's just stupid practices, and he really is the reason why Russia was just a Soviet hellhole for most of the 20th century. So yeah, fuck you, Joseph Stalin. Let's see, Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong is a B list. Mao Zedong obviously led to the deaths of millions and millions of people, but simultaneously, he did get China into a revolution, but he was also just a bad leader in general. His great leap forward was actually, now that I say it more, yeah, he's an A-list. He sucked. He was awful. He led to the deaths of thousands and millions of Chinese people through his great leap forward, which led to famine. He's created the secret police, which would just kill anyone who would go against him. What's fascinating, though, is former Emperor Puyi of China was actually not killed like Tsar Nicholas was by the Russians, but Mao Zedong wanted to promote a greater China, implying that Chinese communism was better than Russian communism, and therefore the way to do that was to show like the mercy of Chinese communism. So if they could make the former emperor of China, the last emperor of China, Emperor Puyi, the former leader of Manchukuo during World War II, thanks to this guy, then he could show how much superior Chinese communism. So he actually had a really big rivalry with Joseph Stalin, but that rivalry led to the deaths of millions of people, and Mao Zedong is the reason why China is doing all the human atrocities right now. But yeah, he sucks. Benito Mussolini. No, that was terrible. I'm sorry for my terrible Italian accent. But yep, Benito Mussolini. He is obviously the fascist dictator of Italy, but simultaneously, I don't think he's as bad as Hitler. I don't think he is as bad as Stalin because Mussolini's fascism was not as aggressive. It wasn't as anti-Semitic as Hitler's fascism, just because Mussolini really did it for more economic means, and he wanted to recreate the Roman Empire. But I'm also hesitant to say that he wasn't as bad just because I know if Italy had more economic and militaristic strength, then there's a good chance that Mussolini could have done some more human atrocities. But because of how ineffective, and as Churchill said, they were the Europe's weak underbelly, um, he really was just unable to do that much, and therefore he couldn't enact the crazy policies which would have landed him higher on this list. So all these guys up here killed millions of people, and they were just disgusting human beings. And I would say Hirohito's above him as well. But yeah, I can't put Mussolini any higher. But at the same time, he was very complacent with Hitler, and he helped Hitler along the way. Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il's a B-list. The thing about Kim Jong-il is that he was the supreme leader of North Korea in like the 90s and in like till I think like 2010, 2011ish. And yeah, the issue with him is that he was not the first leader of North Korea, so I can't put him higher. But simultaneously, his practices were pretty disgusting. But considering Kim Il Sung, which was the founder of North Korea, is not on this list, I can't put him higher. But he still enacted all of the hermit kingdom's crazy policies. He still ensured that North Korea would not go out and start trading with the rest of the world. He's also continue like the camps that go on in North Korea and all the secrecy that goes around there. But yeah, Kim Jong-il, terrible leader, but maybe it was the Matt Stone and Trey Parker movie where they kind of made fun of him that made me not put him as high, just because he just became a parody of himself. And his son Kim Jong-un is now the leader, and he's not great either. But I would put Kim Jong-un in a similar spot. Okay, this goes without saying. Hitler is the worst human being who's ever lived. And I know technically there have been rulers who have killed more people than Hitler, indirectly killed more people than Hitler, but Hitler is the worst. Okay, I don't even know where to start here. Let's just start from the beginning. So he was a terrible anti-Semite. His policies against the Jews were disgusting, and this is even before the Holocaust. The Nuremberg laws, which use eugenics in the writings of American doctors to try to dehumanize the Slavs, the Jews, the communists. He would try to dehumanize all these people just because he frankly didn't like them, and he wanted German supremacy. But simultaneously, what really disgusts me about Hitler is how he killed people on such an industrial scale. Hitler and the Germans were losing the war. And from 1943 onward, that's when the majority of the killings in the Holocaust happened, because they ramped it up. Instead of putting this effort, this money, these funds into the war effort, they went and just tried to exterminate more people. They liquidated all the ghettos. They sent them all to Auschwitz and other concentration camps, and they put them in gas chambers. It is disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting what Hitler did. And the fact that he would take war materials in a war that he's losing and put it to the Holocaust on that scale just shows how much his hatred and how much he saw these people as inhuman. He is single-handedly responsible for World War II. So not only did he contribute to the deaths of millions of Jews, millions of Roma and Gypsies, just thousands of homosexuals, thousands of Freemasons and Jehovah's Witnesses. He killed Catholic priests, which angered Mussolini because obviously the Pope is in Italy, or technically the Vatican, but that's in Italy basically. Yeah, Hitler would just do anything to get his living space for a German people, and it is so disgusting the things he did. And not only that, but you can also attribute all the deaths of World War II in the European and North African campaigns to Hitler, because if it wasn't for Hitler expanding and expanding, invading Poland and then invading France and invading the Norwegian territories and other parts of Eastern Europe, Belarus and Russia and everything, millions of people died from that. The Nazis would, under Hitler's direct orders, because he saw the Russians as inhuman, he would go to local villages and they would burn down the whole town. If you've seen the movie Come and See, they depict these actions of Hitler. But I could literally rant about this for 30 minutes, but y'all get the point. Hitler sucked. He was the worst human being who's ever lived, and the fact that you can say "Okay, Adolf," everybody knows what you mean now, and he's terrible. But that's it, everyone. This is my list. If you disagree with me, remember to let me know in the comment section below. I think it's kind of interesting to have basically all the Russian leaders just because of my one class in the D list. But yep, that's it, everybody. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for everything. Bye.